Hello and very warm welcome to Dr. Zia Ahmed YouTube channel. Today's video at the topic shows that we are going to talk with respect to translation studies and the role of postcolonial theory in translation studies. Let us proceed further and see what else we can discover in this topic. For example, first of all, we need to understand what is postcolonial theory. According to many of the critics, the postcolonial theory consists of the intervention as well as the resistance. The intervention meant that the colonial people or colonizing people arrived in a country, they changed the societies with respect to their culture and the language. And because of their power dynamics, they were able to show cultural imperialism. And the local people continued resistance to the colonial rule. And as a result, translation studies became very much important. First of all, translations were done in order to communicate. While even these studies were being done, at that time also, the superiority of the colonizing culture was thought in mind, and as a result, power dynamics shaped the translations. And the same was the demand of the colonial master. But on the other hand, the people who were colonized, they were translating the things in a reverse way, that they were trying to preserve their culture, whatever they had, their language, whatever they had. So as a result, it was an amalgamation. The translation was an amalgamation of the power dynamics as well as the preservance of the local culture. And therefore, the translator was not a common person. He needed to be some type of expert. For example, when we look at the colonial era at that time, we can see that translation was often used as a tool of domination and control. That was possible at that time because it was the demand of the time. It imposed something, a type of language which was not the indigenous language. It imposed the culture which came with the colonizer, and as a result, the translator was trying to convey this type of dynamics of the translation. But in case of post-colonial era, we can see that many of the cultures started to resist the onslaught and the domination of the theories of colonization. On the other hand, they started to gain more and more cultural autonomy and challenge the colonial power. So these dynamics, which are the last one in the end, they became the hallmark of the translation, which was being done by the people from the colonized lands. So translation had two-way type of process. One was the process which was as per wishes of the colonial master, and on the other hand, the translator had to take care of the things which were related to his own culture. For example, if we look at the language, politics, and the power, we can see that power dynamics played its role. For example, translation is inherently linked to power dynamic as it often involves the translation of languages with unequal status and influence. For this purpose, we can take two languages. One language, which is the language of power, for example, English language, and we may take another language, say for example, Punjabi or Saraiki, which is not the power language in this scenario of the word. When from Saraiki to English, something will be translated, it will be translated with the idea that the speakers of English language are the people who enjoy power and who enjoy protection. On the other hand, when something will be translated into Saraiki or Punjabi, the translator, if he is an indigenous person, would try to preserve the local culture. But if he's not an indigenous person, if he belongs to the colonizing culture, that person may not try to preserve that culture of the translated or the target translation. Therefore, language politics plays a very big role in the post-colonial societies. For example, these societies face the challenges related to language policy, language rights, and the preservation of indigenous languages. The very first problem is that most of the countries do not have any concrete language policy. And in the same way, being colonized people do not have language rights as well. And so are unable to document and then to preserve the indigenous languages. So that is why the indigenous languages remain at a loss, and the language of the colonizing master becomes something which may be the language of the power, and the language of politics therefore continues to play a very big role in it. In the same way, we have some of the challenges also when we translate into or from indigenous languages. For example, first of all, limited resources are the problem. Funding is not available. So documentation and preservation, These two processes of language are unable to take place because of the lack of funding or limited resources, and sometimes lack of willingness as well, absence of concrete policy as well. And the second challenge to this type of translation where postcolonial theory is involved is the lack of trained translators. We do not have the translators which are trained, which can interpret with the help of their expertise and make the indigenous language also a powerful language. We do not have such people, very little number of people are available, and if they are available, they do not find a chance to do so. As a result, there is a problem, gap in the translation between the two languages, the power language and the indigenous language. In the same way, the fluency which we can claim in indigenous languages and the power language, sometimes it is there and sometimes it is not there. And as a result, our generations begin to feel the suppression of language. They begin to see the assimilation of the colonial master's language and the language of the local people joining together. So in that way, identity of the language of indigenous people begins to disappear. After these challenges, we can also see that something more happens from the side of the indigenous people. In the post-colonial era, the translation becomes a type of resistance. This is the second side of the coin, or the flip side of post-colonial theory, that from here, the language into which, if the language is indigenous, translation is coming, at that time it becomes the source of reclaiming the narrative. Translator uses their skills to rewrite colonial narratives and give voice to the marginalized communities. That is one of the biggest benefit. When doing so, the translators are able to preserve some of the vital and important aspects of their own culture and language. So that is why post-colonial translation become the source of cultural preservation as well. And in that way, while doing so, resisting and cultural preservation. Translators and translation can be a tool for challenging the dominance of Western languages and promoting linguistic diversity. This is the biggest possible change which can happen, which can take place because of the post-colonial theory in translation. And then there are certain ethics that must be preserved, which seldom is observed. However, the idea is that the ethics in translation in the post-colonial world may be followed, may be preserved. For example, respect for the source text and the cultural context from which it comes may be taking place. Some kind of transparency regarding the translator's choice and potential impact of translation may also be viewed. Ensuring the translation practices promoting equality and justice for all communities. This is the ethics of translation in post-colonial world. If it is followed, the better results can be found. And then we can also talk about what are the latest trends in all this. The translation in post-colonial theory is increasing intercultural communication. Because of this, there is the increased focus on intercultural communication and understanding in translation studies. It means the post-colonial translation have played a big role in harmonizing the two type of cultures, colonizing culture and colonized culture. It has increased the communication level, and as a result, it is better world now as compared to the past one. Same is the case with the digital translation. There is the new emergence of technology for translation and the impact on language diversity. Digital translations definitely are done by computers, and therefore there is less of bias, less of subjectivity, more of objectivity is present. That is why the translation have become better in case of post-colonial world as well. And then the latest thing is to decolonize translation. This AI use is definitely happening by decolonizing a part of the translation. However, 100% decolonization has not taken place because the tools and the media are managed by the very master who colonized the world. So that is why the efforts are being made to decolonize the translation, however, is not complete at this moment. And then you see, we have reached to the end of this whole thing. We can conclude by saying that translation in the post-colonial era, post-colonial age is a better translation because it not only highlights the power dynamics, but also it attempts to resist the challenges which come because of power dynamic, and also it attempts to preserve the local language and the local culture. However, the efforts are going on, but these are not complete in any regard. So thank you for watching. Hope to see you in some next video. If you understand anything good through this lecture, do not fail to hit the subscribe button as well as the like button. Thank you again for watching.